Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight, I'm going to be going through some really fascinating award information, but it's something that we all need to know and understand. So let's start off with. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land in which we are all meeting from today and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are here with us today. My name, if you don't know me, my name is Carly Saw. I'm the director and founder of Strawberry Seed Consulting. I've been in HR for a very long time and seen lots of changes along the way. I founded Strawberry Seed in 2013. I am true crime obsessed. I also love the Brisbane Lions, and I'm here to sort of share as much information as I can with you today to sort of help you get through this typical time of the year. This is also my team, and this is what we actually end up looking like at this time of the year because it is busy. It is our busiest time of the year because a lot of people reach out for help with this over the next 4 weeks. So let's get into it. Today, we're going to be covering quite a bit of information, and I'm going to try and break it down and make it as simple as possible for you. But there's a number of questions that some of you asked when you registered, and we're going to try and make sure we cover all of those as well. But we're going to deep dive into some of these topics to really make sure you understand the where and the why and the how. Before I get started though, I do want to be clear that today we're not deep diving into any particular industry. This is an all industry session and it's focused on what the changes are and how to prepare. We'll briefly touch on some major changes that are going to be happening, but we're not going into deep detail on any particular award. If you are under the Health Professionals and Support Services Award, though, tomorrow we have a lunchtime webinar that is just for you. It is specifically designed to go through all the changes that are happening within that award, making sure that new classifications, the transitions, how it's going to impact you. We're going to get into detail tomorrow. So if you registered for this session, hoping that I go into deep detail, you're going to be a little bit disappointed. But tomorrow's session, even if you can't watch it, register for it. You'll get sent a recording. It'll also be on our YouTube afterwards because we're going to go really deep on that particular award. Today, we're going to stay more general. So what is actually changing? What is changing is the national minimum wage. It is moving up to $26.44 per hour, which equates to $1,004.90 per week for a full-time employee. And there is a 4.75% increase that is going to apply to all award rates from the 1st of July. Now, it's the first full pay period after the 1st of July. What does that mean? On or after the 1st of July. So if you the 1st of July is a Wednesday, okay? So if you run a pay period that, whoops, my apologies, hit the wrong button there. If you run on a pay period that starts on a Wednesday and it's weekly, and Wednesday, the 1st of July, will be the start of your next pay period that you will pay, then it will start from the 1st of July. If you pay weekly or fortnightly and the Monday, the 29th of June is the start of your pay week, if you pay weekly, the following Monday, because the 1st of July will fall within that pay period, it will not apply until the pay period after. If you pay fortnightly and your pay period starts on the 29th of June, then you won't, the pay period that starts the 13th of July will be the one that it applies to. So it's the first full pay period that occurs after or on the 1st of July. So if you're already in the middle of a pay period when the 1st of July hits, it doesn't apply till the next one. So before we jump into some detail around the awards, I'd just like to sort of touch on our how our laws actually work in Australia, because I think it's good to get a bit of a refresher every now and then. So everything around employment is governed by the Fair Work Act, which contains the National Employment Standards, which are kind of the, 10 commandments, but there's more than 10, on how every employee in Australia has to operate, and it covers things like leave and that 38 hours a week is a full-time work. It covers things like termination, minimum requirements, etc. Today we're going to be really focused on the middle part of this model, which is the industrial instrument. So an industrial instrument is either an award or an enterprise agreement that covers a particular industry or a particular profession, and it is incredibly important that you understand which one applies to your employees, and multiple awards could apply to any particular workplace. And the third element here, as we build on on each of these is the employment agreement, so the contractual arrangement between the employee and employer. And it's important to know that these build on each other, and they can't be less than the one before, or if they are, they have to offset something in regard, particularly when it comes to employment agreements. But today we're really going to be focused in that middle ground on the modern award. So I'd like you to think of your industrial instrument or your award as your rule book. It sets out the minimum conditions for your employees or that are covered by that award. And also, remembering again, you can have multiple awards in one business, but generally speaking, it's where you go to find out the information for your industry or profession. So, as I mentioned before, it's usually a modern award or an enterprise agreement, and it's going to classify employees to be able to set the minimum rates. It's going to say what those minimum pay rates are. It's going to include things around penalties and loading and span of hours and how breaks and overtime work in that award, minimum shift lengths, shift work arrangements. All of those things are contained within your award or awards. So it's really important that you understand what that is and that you are referencing the right award. We do occasionally get people who are accidentally referencing the wrong award. That can particularly be true when some people have maybe come into the private sector from the public sector. There are public sector awards that apply only to the public sector, and we do come across employers that have come out of that space themselves and are referencing that award rather than the fact that they should be referencing one of the modern awards that apply to the private sector. And I also mentioned, and I'll reiterate, that it may be an entire profession, or it may be an entire industry. So there are some awards that will cover off multiple different types of jobs within an industry. So for example, the health professionals I mentioned earlier, that includes all types of jobs that work within an allied health or health environment. There's lots of different types of jobs that are covered. And so that's kind of an all-inclusive one. Other awards can be more specific to your profession. So, for example, if you're a cleaner or you run a cleaning business, you might reference that award. But if you just hire one cleaner into your business, and cleaner is not covered by the award that covers all your other employees, then you'd have to reference that award. Building and construction is a good example. It only covers professions within that sector. It doesn't include, say, administration staff. They would, or, so if you're in the building industry, you're probably also covered by, at a minimum, the clerical award if you have administration staff. So it's important to kind of understand and actually reading the definitions within the award can be helpful. We can obviously always help you as well, but it's not often. Sometimes it's not that you're included, it's that you're excluded. And sometimes there could be different awards that apply, and there's a bit of work that goes into trying to work that out. We went through a couple of tricky ones recently. Now, the first thing I want to really point out here when you're looking at looking for your award, once you know what it is don't just trust Google. I'm not saying Google is wrong, but when you Google things, you may not be getting the most recent version. You could be finding something that someone has saved down as a PDF onto a website. So for me, when you're going to start checking pay rates and classifications and entitlements, where you need to start is the Fair Work website. That will always have the most recent version of the award available. And once you're there, you also want to make sure you're looking at the most current version, because as of today, because I checked just before, the new rates that will be effective 1 July have not yet been published into the awards or the pay guides. Now, that will happen between now and the 1st of July. Hopefully it'll happen next week. That's our fingers crossed, because they did a pretty early announcement this month. But you need to double check, because if you jump the gun and go in and start looking at rates and don't realize it's not the most recent version or it hasn't been updated yet, then it's really important because you could end up looking at the wrong rates. So you need to check both the award, which is going to have all the details, but there's also pay guides for each award as well that will break down the pay rates and are a great resource. And if you are covered by a particular award or awards, you can sign up with Fair Work to ensure that you get updates. So whenever there is an update, you get notified. Now, as I said, Google or an AI can return old pay guides, outdated articles, archived versions. And I've seen it happen. AI can be a great tool for asking it to interpret something in an award in plain English for you or something like that. But if I was going to do that, I would be copying and pasting the link to the live version on the Fair Work site to AI and asking it to reference that specifically. AI can make things up, and it depends when it was updated. So AI tools don't all get updated every day. So once the new rates dropped, if you just went and asked it on the 1st of July, hey, can you go and check the rates? Unless you're telling it to look at the live rates, it could just reference something the last time it updated. So it's just, as a rule of thumb, if you want to check an award, rates or pay guides, always just go to the Fair Work version and you're going to have the most recent version. So you do need to understand how to check whether or not it has been updated. And on any of these documents on Fair Work, there is a publication date. It tells you when it was effective, what the most recent variations are. And I have just got a really quick example on here for the clerical award. If it doesn't show that there was a 30th of June 2026 or a 1 July, don't assume that it's the current version. So you'll see on the screen there that that's a screenshot of the live today, current version of the Clerks Private Sector Award, or the Clerical Award as we call it. And you can see here it says this Fair Work Commission Consolidated Bond Award incorporates all amendments up to and including the 23rd of January 2026. That is the current version that's sitting on there. Until that says the 30th of June or the 1st of July, that's still the one that is in place. It hasn't been updated yet. And you want to make sure you're always getting the right update. And underneath, it'll always tell you what the most recent changes were and to what areas they were changed. You also have over on the right-hand side on that page on the live version, you actually can access all the pay guides, not just for this year, but also for previous years. So if you're ever finding yourself in a situation where you have to back pay or go and check what it was a couple of years ago, that's a great resource as well. So, and it's very searchable when you look at the live version, which is really handy. But don't copy. I mean, it's tempting to copy down or download versions of the award. Please don't do that for yourself, because you always want to make sure you're looking at the right one. So why do we bang on about classifications a lot? It's something we talk about a lot, and certainly tomorrow in the health professionals one, we'll be talking about it most of the time. Classifications and how an employee is classified within an award is what actually says this is what this person should be being paid. So before you even start to check rates, we want to start with, am I using the right award to start off with? Have I correctly classified that person that I'm checking? And another question is, has the role changed since they were first classified? Did I classify them when they started with me 2 years ago and I haven't re-looked at that? So it's always a good time of year to double check that everything is correct. So I want you to remember that there's a number of things that classifications are based on. They can be based on their role and responsibilities. It can be based on qualifications someone has. It can be based on, the level of work responsibility. They might progress on anniversaries. There's variations between awards, and it's really important that you understand how the one or ones that apply to you work. Because even if you've checked the rates, if you've classified incorrectly, you could still end up underpaying someone, and we do see that sometimes. So the most common mistakes that we see, whoops, too far. The employee was classified when they started, no one ever came back and reviewed it. Some awards have classifications that go up after a certain number of years. They just classify based on the qualification and not what the person was doing. Depending on the award, the experience that someone has might really have an impact on that. Promotions happened, there was increased responsibility, but nobody went back and checked whether that changed classification. For awards that progress based on anniversaries, whether it's calendar or it's pro rata, if they're missed, you're looking at the wrong rates. And there's also can be an assumption that all employees performing similar work are at the same level, and that may not be the case depending on your award. So they're always worth checking. So different awards use different factors to actually work out what the right classification is. I've got a couple of examples in here. The Health Professionals Award, for example, it is now it already is, the starting point currently is on qualifications, but it's actually moving, and that's what we're talking about tomorrow, to very much being clear on the qualification. So the Australian Quality Framework, manufacturing is another award that works off the quality framework. So that's the factor that sort of is a starting point for that award, but it does change depending on the award you're under. So for when it comes to things like moving based on duties and responsibilities, the clerical award or the clerk's private sector award. That's one where people can, if their job changes, their classification might change. So if under that award, their classification is based primarily on the work that they're doing, not necessarily their length of service or something like that. So if you haven't looked at it, but their job has continued to evolve, you might find that they should be classified at a higher level based on the evolution of their job. Experience and progression. So a retail employee, for example, will progress through pay points, and it could be based on their age, it could be the amount of experience that they've got now. So they might, some awards, for example, have, the first 3 months and then up to 1 year, and then after 1 year, and then after 2 years, and they can progress on experience. So it's important to understand how you progress in your award if you progress. For example, in the clerk's award that I've already mentioned, if your job doesn't change, you don't change classification. So it's pretty safe to say that. Whereas in other ones, there's other factors that you need to consider. And the SHADS Award, or the basically disability social services industry, one of the most complex awards that we do have. That is the type of award that you can progress based on the level of supervision you require. So a disability support worker's classification is determined by the complexity of their role, their responsibility, their qualifications, and the degree of supervision that they need. So it's not as simple as other awards. So understanding how this works in your award is incredibly important. It's the same principle, it's just different rules depending on what you're covered by. So I also like everyone to remember that 2026 is, and most years are not always just a percentage update. And that's especially true this year because there's been a number of changes, and I'll touch on some of them towards the end. But there can be award specific changes. There's some awards are reviewed on a regular basis, and it's not just the rates that might change. So think factors such as allowances can go up. The amount someone gets reimbursed for kilometres might go up. It's not always just the minimum rate. So you do need to check your award, and it will tell you, like I showed you before, like once you've got the new version, it'll say, here's the things that changed. And if there was changes to allowances or, fuel reimbursement or other things, it will tell you what else has changed. And sometimes there's things that are changed outside the scope of just the minimum wage increase. The gender undervaluation changes I'll touch on at the end, that's made some changes significantly in a couple of awards. So you just want to make sure that you're not just assuming it's just the pay rates that have increased. And as I mentioned, if you sign up for copies of the award updates to be sent to you, that makes life a lot easier because they tell you every time there's a change. So the biggest question that we get is, do I need to increase pay on the 1st of July? Now, the answer is maybe. We can't just give you a blanket yes or no. So I've got just a little quick test to go through. The first question I would ask is, are you paying award minimum rates? If you're just paying what the award minimum states in the pay guide, then the answer is going to be yes, you will have to increase rates because they will go up by 4.75% on the 1st of July. That's an easy one. So if you're paying award rates, you will have to make increases. If the answer is no, then you move on to the next question. And the next question is, are employees still paid above the award minimum? Because even if you're not paying the minimum rates, these rates go up every year. If you're not checking them every year, you need to double check that your employee is still paid above award rates. And we'll get into some detail around that. And if the answer is yes, then you're not legally required to make any increases. However, if the answer is no, then you have to at least adjust them to hit the new minimum rates. And we're going to go into that in a bit more detail for you. So above award with employees and the 4.75% increase, this was a specific question that was asked. People are like, do I have to apply that to everybody's salary? And it can be a common misconception that every employee must receive 4.75% increase. It can be, particularly when it's on the news and, it's quite a large increase this year, so it's getting a lot of publicity. And employees just all expect that we're all getting a 4.75% increase. However, there's only, there's not that many employees in Australia. I mean, there's quite a few, but most employers do pay above award. So it's not an automatic, I'm going to get that increase. So If your employee is already paid above the award minimum, you may not be legally required to adjust it, but you should still check the classifications. You should still check that they meet the better off overall boot test. We'll get to that. Um, you know, are you trying to set rates higher to absorb increases and things? And you also want to think about retention and attraction as well. But again, we'll get into that in a bit more detail. So if you're already paying above award rates, you just, as a starting point, need to check. Am I still going to be paying correctly after that 4.75% is applied to the current minimums? And this is particularly important if you pay a flat rate for all hours worked. So if you just pay people $30 an hour regardless of what day or time that they work. If you are in an annualized salary situation where it's annualized across a year, or if you're saying your rates are inclusive, like they're inclusive of overtime, they're inclusive of certain allowances, you're not specifically paying them separately, then you at least have to double check and ensure that people are being paid correctly. And you just need to make sure you're paying enough to cover everything. It's pain, and we do. I think we've got about 160 that we're doing already, and that's not including people that are reaching out every day. But this is what the Better Off Overall test is. It's making sure that for everything you're saying is included in that salary, that what you're actually paying is going to cover it. And the award rates go up every year. It was 3.5% last year. It's 4.75 this year. That's over 9%. So if you didn't look at it last July, and so you haven't checked an employee's salary since July 1, 2024, there's been a 10% increase. Is what you're paying enough to cover everything you say it is? That's what a Better Off Overall check is. This question came up as well in the registration. So we recently gave pay rises. Do we need to increase again? Well, the answer is maybe. Depends. Possibly. Not necessarily. The question isn't, did we recently give them a pay rise? Okay. You can have your pay calendar set any way you like. I tend to review salaries around January with a 1 Feb start every year for my team. But you still need to double check when July comes around that they're being paid correctly. The right question is the employee still being paid at or above the award minimum? So if you gave an increase at the beginning of March and they're still being paid, great. If they're still being paid right, but you have to check it. You can't just make assumptions. So if you had an employee, for example, that received a 5% increase in April, and when you check it, they're still above the award, no, you don't have to do anything. There's no legal requirement to do so. If you had an employee who received a 2% increase, but that wasn't enough to cover the 4.75, then yeah, you might have to have a further increase for that employee. You can't just set and forget this. And that's where most people we see get in trouble, is that they do it or they ask us to do it and then they come back to us 3 years later and say, I haven't really looked at it since last time you did it. And there's been changes and they haven't really factored in progression or increases. So before you start checking, there's a couple of questions you can ask yourself in preparation that might help you understand whether or not there's going to be likely that you might see some things that need to be fixed. If you've made any changes to your trading days or hours, are you suddenly now open Saturdays and you've never gone back and re-looked at salary and wages and you're not paying penalties on weekends, you're saying they're inclusive? Definitely something worth checking. If any of your individual employees have changed hours, added hours, moved days, or work starting later, earlier, again, these are the sort of things that would prompt a check. Has there been a change in role and responsibilities? Has the employee had a work anniversary? Because depending on how you progress in your award, that might prompt it. And again, has there been any other benefits or changes that you've made for the employee? And for those that, they're phasing out junior rates now, but if you do have an award that has junior rates for those under the age of 21, then if they have a birthday, their rate needs to go up. So you need to be monitoring that for people under the age of 21 if that's part of your award. So I'm going to run through a couple of example boots. They're not over the top. It's just to give you a bit of an idea on how we approach it. So the first one I have here is Bill. Bill works 38 hours a week. He's a full-time employee, and he's classified as a level two pay point four in his award. He's paid an annual salary of 80,000 per annum, which is 40.49 per hour. Now, the reason we break it down to an hourly rate is the award is laid out as an hourly rate. We're not comparing $80,000 a year. We're comparing the 40.49 per hour, which is basically $80,000 divided by 52 weeks divided by 38 hours. I'd also like to be really clear that that's exclusive of superannuation. This is something that that we get asked quite a bit, and award rates are not inclusive of super. They are, super is exclusive, which is why we encourage people to, when you're providing salaries to people, making sure it's very clear what their base salary is, because if you're including super in what you're comparing, then you could potentially be underpaying your employees. So the current award rate for Bill on a level two pay point four is 39.63, and that's inclusive of leave loading. Why have I said including leave loading? Because a lot of employers don't pay leave loading as a separate entitlement. They include it in people's rates. From our perspective, it's a question we ask because we need to know what we're comparing it to. So in this table, you'll see a little yellow cell there that says 39.63. That's the award rate, and we've already added leave loading into it. So we're not having to add it anywhere else. We're looking at that rate. If we paid leave loading separately, then we would look at what the award rate is without leave loading included. So how do we compare? And it looks overcomplicated. I'm not showing you any of the formulas or anything, and it's got unhidden columns and it's not necessarily pretty, but you don't need a fancy spreadsheet to work this out, because the concept, you can literally do it on a piece of paper if you need to. So the first thing we have here in that column where that yellow cell is we have what the award entitlement is, which we know is 39.63, and that's the minimum that that employee must be paid. And then we have the 40.69 the employee is actually earning. Now, in this instance, Bill's working all of his hours within Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. He's not working any shift work or overtime or anything like that. So it's a pretty easy comparison here, because 38 times the award of 39.63 compared to the 38 times the 40.49 is going to tell us that he's paid above the award. Now, that's fine if he never does any overtime or anything like that. But if you wanted that $80,000 a year to include things like offset overtime and other things, then there's a fair chance the bill would end up being underpaid. So that's where you've got to understand how much is built in. But this is a starting point, really simple comparison. On the right-hand side there, there's no additional calculations because there's no overtime, there's no shift work rates. It's purely 38 times both rates, and we can see that he's paid correctly, which is great. There at the end, you can see it's in green. Now, take it up a step. We've got Betty. Betty works 22 and a half hours per week. She's part-time. One of her shifts of 7.5 hours is worked outside of ordinary hours and is considered shift work. So that entire shift will get a penalty of 115% added to her. That needs to be factored in when it comes to calculating her better off overall test. Now, Betty's paid a flat rate of $30 an hour. And the employers wants to just pay that and not think about the different rates on the different days or the different shifts. The current award rate for her classification is 22.63, and again, it's including leave loading. These are old rates. These are not current rates. Do not look at these rates to set anything. It's just for example. I don't update them every year, and the rates haven't been published yet anyway. So as with before, we have that first column there. The award entitlement we know is 26.23, including leave loading, and the employee's getting $30 an hour. This is where it gets different. Now, at a flat rate, the employee is going to receive $675 a week, because that's $30 an hour times 22.5 hours. However, to compare it for the award, we have to break those 22 and a half down into 7.5 hours at a shift work rate of 115% loading and 15 hours at an ordinary hours. Over on the right-hand side here, that's where that sort of calculates. So for the employee in the bottom row, it's just the 22 and a half times 30, which is 675. That's an unchanged rate. Whereas for the award entitlement, we've got the 15 hours at 26.23, and then we've got 7.5 hours that have got the penalty loading, which works out to in this. Don't check that too closely. I don't know if that's accurate. $223.22. But that brings, when the better off overall test is checking, okay, If they just got the award, they would have been paid 616.64 at the 30 hours. So $30 an hour over 22 and a half hours, they get $675. They're paid at or above the award, they meet the test. Now, you'll see at the end there, oops, I'm going the wrong way. Apologies. The minimum boot rate is something we've popped in there. That basically is the rate that has been calculated that Betty must be earning at least that based on the hours she's working to be at or above it. And because she's obviously $30 an hour, she's way above it. But it gives you an idea on where she's sitting. And so, if it's a 4.75% increase, probably could be absorbed in Betty, but I would still do the figures anyway. I'd still update them. Now, this will take you into a bit of a test. So something we do sometimes is we test the outer limits. We want to, some employers pay a salary arrangement, annualized salary, but they want to understand how much is actually built in because they know they're paying a lot above the award, but how much have I got to work with within that I can use to offset things like overtime and penalty rates and things like that if I don't want to be paying them when they come up. So in this case, we have Janet. Janet is paid $45 an hour. And you can see here on this spreadsheet that her in the yellow there, the award rate is $39.63 for her. And she's paid $45. So that's the same. The top one's just like we did before with leave loading. The bottom one is where we're playing with it and we're doing some modeling to work out where the outer limits will be. So because we're doing now a comparison, this example down the below of outer limits is actually 8 hours worth of overtime. So this person, it's saying if this person worked 46 hours every week, would they still be better off overall? Now, this is an extreme situation, saying that someone works that many hours of overtime, but believe me, we've seen some different ones in different industries, and it's particularly pertinent when you have part-time employees, because in part-time employees might be paid a lot above the award, but they have less hours to accrue that difference to offset things. So it's important to check. So in this instance, we'd be saying, okay, the flat rate of 45 an hour for 46 hours is going to be $2,070 ordinary pay for that week. However, under the award, the first 2 hours would be paid at time and a half, and then the subsequent hours would be paid at double time. So then we have to break that 46 down to 38 at ordinary, 8 hours of overtime broken down into the first 2 hours, and then after that. And in this instance, this employee would no longer be better off overall because they would be earning less than they would have got under the award. Now, that's an extreme kind of thing. And often we do some modeling for clients where we go, okay, well, based on what we're paying them, like when do they fall out of it? And we sort of work around that. In this instance, we calculated, and we haven't shown all the calculations, but Janet's boot of 5 hours of overtime per week would be sit very, very comfortably in that. Once you start getting over that, you might want to start considering time off in lieu and other options, and why she has to do 5 hours of overtime every week. But it's just, there's other ways of doing it. I like to call it conscious rostering. So I understand that, hey, this person is paid correctly. And if they took on a couple of extra hours during the week and did some overtime and we paid them a flat rate, they'd still be okay. However, if they worked on Saturday, they would tip out of being okay. So that you need to understand where someone reaches their outer limits. So now that I've bored you with some spreadsheets and numbers, do I have to increase my employee's salary? Again, we're reiterating these in some different ways, but there's a reason because people ask these questions and they ask them in different ways. Again, if you are no longer paying enough to be at or above the award, you must adjust their salary up. If you've done a better off overall test, you've compared it, any increase is voluntary. It's that simple. But if you haven't checked it and you're basing it on assumptions because you're paying above the award, that's where we see people get into trouble over and over again. Hence why we do this webinar every year. So another question we got was, do we need to update employment agreements? Now, the answer to that is usually not. You don't always every year have to update employment agreements. That if the only thing that is changing is you're giving someone a pay increase, I would absolutely still say document it, but you don't have to, just because there's a new rate, give someone an entire new employment agreement. Because if the only thing that has changed is their rate, that can be done through an amendment letter or a letter that simply states, effective from the 1st of July, you'll be receiving an increase. Your new rate will be X amount per hour. All other conditions of employment stay the same. I do ask we do recommend you get the employee to sign that to say that they've accepted it. And that gives you a paper trail to show where the amendments happen. But if all other parts of the employment agreement haven't changed, there's no reason to reissue a new employment agreement every year. However, I would consider doing that if it's been a couple of years since you've looked at them. If you've got agreements that haven't been looked at since 2023, there were quite a few significant changes in 2023. And we've been reviewing some recently where people actually have reviewed them themselves and we've found a few issues. If they're a couple of years old, it is probably worth at some point getting somebody to look over them. If you're trying to change the way someone's paid, if you're trying to say, hey, I now want to say your rate because it's gotten so high is inclusive of overtime or is inclusive of loading in allowances that we haven't said before, then that's quite a significant change. And I would suggest that that would trigger an update. If their role has changed significantly and it's impacted their working arrangements, someone has gone from being on by the hour to an annualized salary, then yeah, it might be a worthwhile time to readjust that if there have been a couple of changes. And just, please don't ever move a permanent employee to casual or vice versa and just keep them on the same agreement. That they are two different types of agreements, and it's really important because there's different conditions of employment, and we see people do that and get into trouble. So July, when you're already checking things, it's always a good time to have a think, is everything still up to date? Um, I just want to sort of, as we get towards the end, where I'm going to open up to questions and I'll answer anything anyone would like. When it comes to setting a salary, you've got to remember that paying the award minimum is the starting point. It's the minimum legal requirement, but it's not the only factor. And sometimes we see people who pay on the award are very close to the award, and they get surprised when, they have problems in other areas. But ultimately, yes, legally you're meeting your requirements, but it shouldn't be the only thing you're considering. It's really good to have an idea of what's happening in the market around you. Now, the market is going to be influenced by so many factors. It's going to be influenced by where you are. You're in a capital city, you're in a regional area. Regional areas often have to pay more than capital cities because there's a smaller market of people and they need to attract people out. You find this information by talking to your professional association, doing research, going and looking what other people are advertising and paying, speaking to recruitment agencies. But, I've seen many instances where employers just assume what they're paying is at market rates, and then they get really surprised when a whole heap of people apply for a role and they're asking, I can't believe how much they're asking for, but they haven't considered that market rates have changed, and they can change overnight. They can change for different professions. They can change across the board. Certainly, COVID really impacted salaries quite a bit. I've seen times where there's a real shortage in an industry. It pushes salaries up because it becomes competitive and people have to start offering more money to attract and retain people. Speaking of which, retention is a really big factor that you need to consider. Capacity to pay has always got to be number one once you're meeting the legal requirements. But if you want to retain employees that are great, members of your team, they fit culturally, they're really good performers, just giving them minimum increases might not be enough, particularly if you're not keeping an eye on the market, because eventually they might start looking around and realize that other people are offering more money than what you're paying them. And look, it's quite common for someone to get a bump when they change jobs. But if you're recruiting and you're finding that, everyone who's applying is getting more money than the people you already have, people can talk about their salaries, and it's a good idea to actually make sure that you are continually reviewing outside of the compliance element. And of course, retraction, which we've already kind of covered, that, if you want to attract people to your business and, people go, oh, I've been advertising and I can't get anybody. And then you go and do a bit of market research and realize, well, they're offering 90 grand a year and everybody else is offering over 100. Of course, you're not going to have that many people apply. And you can't get upset when people, that people are all too expensive to what you want to pay, because if what you want to pay is not what the market is paying, that's a you problem, not a them problem. Just a few other changes that are coming around in the next period of time I thought it was worth touching on. Unless you've been under a rock, Payday Super is coming, and it is coming into place from the 1st of July. So currently, whether you pay weekly or or fortnightly or monthly, you can pay your super quarterly. That changes from the 1st of July this year. Um, if you pay your wages weekly, you've got to pay super in that pay cycle. If you pay fortnightly, you've got to pay your super in that pay cycle. Um, that is coming. You can't do anything about it. And if you're not compliant, ATO will come after you. We're not payroll experts. And, I like to say that if it comes under the banner of Fair Work, it's us. If it comes under the banner of the ATO, um, you know, it's your accountant. But this is something you need to be aware of. And if you're not aware of it, you need to be talking to your accountant or a bookkeeper if you have one. If you don't, you need to be across this yourself. So you need to be asking yourself questions like, is my payroll system ready now? If you use any of the commercial systems, then yes, it's I've got multiple emails from my bookkeeper reminding me that this is coming. But you need to think about how it's going to impact your cash flow, not paying it quarterly, paying it at each pay cycle, and ensure that you're monitoring for compliance. Who is doing that in your organisation? Who's making sure that you're going to be up to date? And if that's you, no matter how boring it is, and believe me, I hate doing ATO stuff myself, it's your job to make sure it's up to date. A couple of other small changes that happen this time of year. These haven't actually been published yet. So from the 1st of July every year, the application fee for Fair Work to make a claim of some sort, whether that's an unfair dismissal, general protections, discrimination claim, it goes up, it's indexed, it goes up every year. It's currently $89.70. The new rate has not been published yet. It usually gets published towards the end of June, but that will go up. And the high income threshold also is indexed and goes up every year. This is basically the tipping out point for employees. So if you have someone that is covered by an award, but they're paid above the high income threshold, they actually don't have access to unfair dismissal in the jurisdiction of Fair Work. They have to move into a different jurisdiction if they have any workplace claims. And I did read somewhere that potentially it's been touted that it might go up to 190,000 a year, but as I said, these haven't been published yet, so they're still the current rates, but they will go up. Just a couple of other changes to be aware of that just should be on your radar. Paid parental leave will increase to 130 days from the 1st of July. That's obviously the government entitlement, but it's something that, to keep in mind. And superannuation on government paid parental leave will apply for children born or adopted from the 1st of July 2025 with payments made from this year. So, there's some changes in that space that you'll need to be aware of. Now, I did mention the gender underevaluation award changes are continuing to happen. There's several awards, pharmacy, SCADs, children's services and health professionals that have been affected. There's some staged increases and changes happening across these awards. If you're covered by any of these, you need to be across it. And as I said, we're deep diving the health professionals award changes tomorrow. I've been up to my eyeballs in it, and we'll try and help you understand what's coming. But, there's lots of different changes and you need to be across them. There are a couple of state changes to keep on your radar. This week, Victoria has actually put the legislation in to try and bring in proposed right to work from home legislation. So that's going to be a watch this space. We'll do some updates about that as we have more information. Community services employers, if you're in that space, portable long service leave schemes are continuing to expand across different states and different jurisdictions, and that's something that you need to be aware of. And again, a lot of these kind of changes, you can sign up for updates about them, which is really, a great way to keep on top of it. And if you're a multi-state employer, there are a lot of changes going on around psychosocial hazards and work health and safety, flexible work. Different states are doing different things, and that'll continue to evolve. So if you're looking after employees in more than one state, you need to be aware that there could be different requirements in different states. There's some states that lead the way. Certainly Victoria tends to lead the way around work health and safety, things around psychosocial hazards, for example, but other states then sit back and watch, and then they come along for the ride. Two considerations I like to remind everybody of this time of the year, casuals and contractors. It's really easy to set and forget when it comes to these two types of engagements. And unfortunately, people get into trouble with both of them because they just don't re-look at them. I mean, sometimes people get into trouble because they shouldn't have been casuals or they shouldn't have been contractors in the first place, but it's more likely that the arrangement has evolved and changed, and nobody's actually thought about sitting back and reevaluating it. So if you engage casuals and contractors, now's a good time of year to just do that little bit of a check and make sure that you're there's no one that needs to have a conversation or have some changes made. So your July 2026 action plan. They're going to confirm that you're under the correct awards. You're going to review classifications to make sure they are all still correct. You're going to check the minimum rates once they are published. I know that you can add 4.75% to what's already there. I am a firm believer that we don't start actually updating and sending things back to our clients until they are published by Fair Work, because there can be other little changes that are made, and we always know we're actually dealing with the right thing. Review anyone that's on an above award salary. Do boot checks if required. Make sure that you update payroll. I've seen people send out letters to all their employees and say, hey, we're updating your salary, and actually not process it in the payroll. Don't be that employer. Communicate with your employees. As I said earlier, it can just be a letter that lets them know, hey, there's been a change to your classification, or there's been a change to your wage from a particular date. And it's really good to have that paper trail to be able to map back through, particularly if something goes wrong or someone's claimed they're being underpaid. Having a paper trail that you can go back through to show, no, this is when we told them, they accepted it, they were aware, can be incredibly helpful. Check that you're ready for Payday Super, and just keep an eye on any industry specific changes that might apply to your business. So that is it from me today. I am more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. If you've got anything you want to ask, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A box. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that I can live. It depends how detailed it is, but if you've got any questions around anything around the award increases or the minimum wage increase, something, I can answer things around award if I've got that information off the top of my head. But if anyone has got any questions, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A box, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. If all our details are on there, we can help you through this process. When we send out a recording to you, we'll have some details on the process for you to follow. If you would like us to assist you with that, if you are one of our HR partners or Essentials Plus package clients, then we do that. It's already included in your package. But we have, particularly with the changes around health professionals this year, we have a very specific process that we are following to ensure that we stay on top of it all, because, it's a big time of year for us. So we ask that you don't just flick through emails to us, but you follow our process. Does anyone have anything that they would like me to answer before they jump off? I haven't had any questions added in for now. If not, I'm more than happy to stay on for a few minutes if somebody would like to put their hand up and maybe ask a question. But otherwise, as always, please feel free to reach out to our team if you need assistance in any of these areas. We'll be putting the recording of this on YouTube, as well as sending it out to anyone that was attending today, and anyone who registered within the next 48 hours. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out for our team. We are more than happy to answer anything that you have. And if you're not already on our mailing list, I highly recommend that you sign up for our Punnet newsletter. We don't send it out unless there's a reason, but we do try and keep you up to date with changes that are happening. And this is a particular webinar that we do every June, just to keep people up to date. It's usually our most popular one for the year. Tonight's had a few less people register than normal, but we have about 155 for the lunchtime one tomorrow. So I think that's going to be quite a big one, because everyone wants to be across those changes. So thank you so much for your time. I'll hang around for another 4 minutes if anyone wants to throw in a question before I log off. But have a lovely evening, and thank you for attending tonight.